Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this planning meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and welcome the committee and members of the public this evening. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, so that moves us on to item 3, disclosures of pecuniary interest and nature thereof. And I'll ask any member if you have any pecuniary interest you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can declare one anytime if you need to. Next is adoption of minutes, and I have a motion moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Schreider, I assume, Councillor Schreider, that the Planning Committee minutes dated December 17, 2018 are hereby approved as circulated. Are there any questions or comments to that set of minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. We have no public meetings this evening. So that moves us into Committee of the Whole and no delegations. That takes us right to 6.2 reports, and there are 5 reports on this evening's agenda. And the first one is with regard to Barry's Construction, 775 Elegans Street, and we'll turn it over to Tessa for the report.
Thank you. So this is an application that went to public meeting back in September and then was delayed on request of the applicant to work out some site plan stuff with the town. But now it's come back for recommendation. So it is for the property at 775 Elegans Street, which is basically right off the corner of Elegans and Arlington Street in Port Elgin. So just to give some context, this is the property here. It is currently vacant. So the house that's shown in the aerial view was demolished a few years ago. So it is no longer on the property. And it is currently zoned R2. And it is residential area for the most part. And water and sewer are available. And it is on a year-round municipal road, Elegans Street. So the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone the proposed lands from R2 to R3 special in order to allow the construction of a townhouse on the subject lands. So special provisions are proposed in the R3 zone to allow for a reduced lot size and reduced frontage for the interior townhome units. So that would be these 2 units in the middle, the 2 exterior ones. There's no issues in terms of the R3 zoning, they meet it, but the interior ones do require some relief. So it is 4 units that are being proposed on the property. And they're all proposed to be severed along the common wall, so that each unit would be on its own lot of record. And so those consent applications are being processed concurrently through the county. So just to go through the policies and to update everyone, because it has been a little while since we saw this application. In terms of the provincial policy statement, the PPS provides direction on the long-term vitality of settlement areas and the efficient use of land, and it does promote intensification and redevelopment that promotes a compact form of development. The PPS also directs development to occur in areas with appropriate infrastructure and public service facilities. PPS states that redevelopment and intensification within settlement areas on existing municipal services should be promoted wherever feasible. And this is considered intensification. It is within the built-up area of the town of Saugeen Shores. This property was not deemed to have any high archaeological potential or any features of natural heritage that required any special consideration, so there was no archaeological assessment or EIS undertaken for the property. In terms of the county official plan, the county housing objectives include entering a range of housing types as well as providing for intensification in existing urban areas. General housing policies of the county include development criteria for intensification, so the proposed development is supported by the county OP. In terms of the local official plan, the subject lands are designated residential in the Saugeen Shores official plan, so the proposed residential use is permitted. There's a number of criteria which have been established to evaluate housing proposed for intensification. So the first criteria is the availability of municipal services to accommodate the increased demand, including water, sewer, storm, and parkland. And so municipal services are available. The dwelling will be connected to municipal water and sewer. A stormwater management letter was submitted, and I believe further work has been done with the town on stormwater in this area. And parkland is within 500 meters of the property. Another criteria is that off-street parking is adequate, and the required 2 parking spaces will be provided. Criteria C is compatibility with the existing neighborhood. And so the proposal meets all the setbacks, coverage, parking, open space, and height requirements of the existing R2 zone. So it is my opinion that it is appropriate in terms of scale, massing, and siting for a residential area. A building of these dimensions is currently permitted as of right on this lot. The zoning will simply allow for the building to contain 4 dwelling units in the form of a townhome, as opposed to 2 larger dwelling units in the form of a semi or a very, very large, potentially single detached dwelling. Criteria D is that the existing vegetation is maintained, and as you can see from this photo, there's very little other than grass on the lot in terms of existing vegetation, but the applicant has indicated that they do intend to plant trees in the front yards of the proposed townhomes. Criteria E is that community services and other neighborhood conveniences are accessible. So the proposed development is located centrally in Port Elgin and is within 1 kilometer of the downtown commercial core, schools, parks, trails, emergency services, and community facilities. And criteria F is the capability to provide adequate buffering and other measures to minimize any identified impacts. So I know that there has been some discussion with neighboring property owners in terms of fencing along the common lot lines, which is standard with most fencing in any residential area. So that is being looked at. In terms of the proposal, it is considered medium density. And so medium density is permitted in the official plan at 40 units per gross hectare. The proposal represents a density of approximately 37 units per gross hectare. In considering medium density residential development, there's also a number of criteria that the OP requires us to look at. So the first criteria has to do with respecting the existing character of the development in terms of height, bulk, massing, and density using adjacent land uses. So as noted, the proposed development meets all the zoning provisions in regard to height, coverage, and setbacks as currently exist in the R2 zone. Within 250 meters of the property, which is a 2-minute walk, there are areas of R3 and R4 zoning, which include semi-detached townhome and apartment dwellings. And there are other existing townhomes within less than 150 meters of the property, so it is my opinion that the proposal is in keeping with the character of the area. B is that it will not cause a traffic hazard. It is not the expectation that the addition of 4 dwellings will result in any notable change in traffic conditions. Likely not more than 2 trips per hour at peak times as an average calculation. In terms of medium density residential uses will be encouraged to be in proximity to arterial and collector roads, and Arlington Street, which is the nearest intersection to Elegans Street, is considered a collector road in the Saugeen Shores official plan. And the development can be appropriately serviced, which it can be, as I mentioned, and the proposed development is appropriately set back, landscaped, and buffered from surrounding residential properties. And so, as I mentioned, the proposal meets all the same setbacks as currently required and will include the necessary amount of landscaped open space. In regards to buffering, as I mentioned, there's been discussions in regards to fencing along the common lot lines. So it is the opinion of the Planning Department that the proposal meets the necessary criteria as established in the Saugeen Shores official plan and conforms to the policies of the plan in regards to intensification and infill. So just in terms of zoning, briefly, so it is proposed to go from R2 to R3 as special. The special provisions, as mentioned, are related to lot area and lot frontage. So the minimum lot area of the R3 zone for a townhouse is 300 square meters per unit. On average, the property will provide 270 square meters of lot area per unit. However, because we're proposing to sever along the common wall, these interior units will have a reduced lot area down to 239 square meters, as they are not provided with any kind of side yard, right? They're squished in between the other units. As such, the applicant is requesting a minimum lot area to be reduced to 235 square meters. And I would just note that the minimum required lot area for a semi-detached dwelling is 250 square meters. And by the nature of their built form, interior townhouses, so these units here, don't have side yards, right? They just have a front yard and a rear yard. As such, it seems appropriate that townhouses should have a smaller lot size than required for semi-detached dwellings, which by their nature do have a side yard. The exterior townhouses, so these two here, meet the proposal the proposed 300 meet the required 300 square meter lot size. So these two meet that 300 requirement, but the interior ones do not. So it is our opinion that the proposed lot size of 235 square meters for the interior unit meets the intent of the bylaw, as the bylaw currently does not appear to sufficiently contemplate that townhouses, by their nature, have a reduced lot size as a result of their built form. And then in terms of lot frontage, it's only a very minor change that's being sought. The proposed interior units have a frontage of 5.9 meters and instead of the required 6, so it's only a 10 centimeter difference from the existing bylaw. And the applicant has requested that the minimum frontage of 5.8 meters be permitted just to provide a little bit of a buffer, so an extra 10 centimeter buffer. In terms of, there were no major issues raised by any of the agencies circulated. The town of Saugeen Shores noted some comments in terms of stormwater management, but that is to be dealt with through site plan control. In terms of public comments, as mentioned, we held a public meeting on September 17th. There were also written submissions received from 2 adjacent property owners, and as well as a petition which had multiple signatories. The major issues raised are noted here, and I'll just note a few comments in regards to the comments received. So Mr. Kaufman at 776 Market Street, which is directly behind the proposed development, raised issues about blocking his view, but as I mentioned, the proposed development a development of the same dimensions could be built today on that property, so there's no additional impact from the zoning in terms of potential view from him. Any development on this property is going to block his view from the rear to an extent. He also raised some issues in terms of property values, and I'll just note that property values are not a consideration in matters of land use planning. It should be noted that MPAC assessments are based on the sale of comparable properties in the area. Therefore, a single detached dwelling would not be compared to a townhouse. The 5 major factors considered by MPAC in assessing a property are location, lot dimension, living area, age of property, and quality of construction. None of these factors are impacted by the proposed development. And in terms of kind of what a sale price is in terms of a property value, there's so many factors to consider in that it's not something we have the capability to consider in land use planning. Our decision is based on whether it makes good sense from a land use planning point of view. In terms of Mr. Kennedy's comments, he raised a number of concerns, and I'll just note he made some comments in regards to the setbacks. As mentioned, the zoning meets all the setbacks as they exist today, and so there's no additional impact as part of this application. It is our opinion that the neighborhood contains a variety of housing forms and that the proposed townhouse is not out of character. Any issues with stormwater will be addressed through site plan control. And again, as Mr. Kaufman also raised property values as an issue, and they are not a consideration in land use planning. And then the petition raised a number of issues as well. in terms of traffic, especially. That was one that was raised by the petition. And as I mentioned, it's not expected that 4 dwellings will seriously impact traffic in this area. It doesn't represent a significant increase and should not represent any increase to risk to cyclists or pedestrians. The petition did not claimed it was on keeping with the neighborhood. However, it is our opinion as planning staff that the neighborhood already includes a variety of housing forms, and this townhome development is not fundamentally out of character, and just, again, address property values. So, in summary, this is a zoning bylaw that is requested to rezone the lots from R2 to R3 special, R311. And we do recommend approval. It does meet the criteria as outlined in the official plan. And so we do recommend approval and that the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption.
Thank you very much, Tessa. I'll ask members of council for questions or comments. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Tessa. Will each of the backyards be fenced for privacy? Right? The dotted lines, was that fence line or is that just...
I believe there's a lane. There's
a lane at the back, but
yeah.
Separating each of the units, will there be a privacy fence?
Stu's not here. I'm not sure. That would be probably up to the builders or the individual owners, right? If
Not by Barry's. Okay, I've seen it in others. And we have plenty of lot room at the back, correct? So this is sorry if this is a kind of a silly question, but wouldn't it make sense to move the building 10 centimeters back rather than doing a variance at the front?
Oh, no, it's not for the front yard setback, it's for the frontage. So for the width of the lot. So they'll just be 10 centimeters too narrow. So it's this distance,
okay, sorry, I thought it
as
was,
opposed to the frontage.
We had to add okay.
No, it'll still meet the 6 meter setback for the front yard.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Further questions from members? Councillor Grace.
Mayor, and through you. Jay, I guess this is a question for you. I did send it to you earlier, but I'm going to ask it again because I'd like the answer on the record. And that's the question regarding this is from the letter from GM Blue Plan Engineering on May 31st, 2018 to Stu Doyle. And it's about the infiltration pit. And it says, it's our understanding that the town intends to construct an infiltration pit at a point downstream of the subject property. You replied to me that the cost in full would be carried by the developer, and can we have that as on the record, please?
Yes, so infiltration pits, firstly, in Port Elgin are, say, they're not uncommon. There are a few in town, at least in Port Elgin. They were developed in the 70s, 80s as a response to a lot of the storm flows that were generated at that time, and they've functioned quite well. So the types of density, when we're increasing them in the areas, we often ask, at least in Port Elgin again, for development to either expand infiltration pits or install new ones. In this case, they have to improve the Arlington Street storm pit, and as per usual, we ask and require the developer to pay the full share of the installation and the restoration of the lands.
Further questions by members? I guess I just wanted to raise an issue. I guess and it's around this question of the special provisions in the R3 zone. It seems to me that it's possible to fit a townhome style unit in this space in a manner that conforms with the density scaling, etc., of an R2 development, as the planner has pointed out. But this one doesn't do that. It asks for further relief through these special provisions from the R3 zone, creating lots that are, by my calculation, 20%. Those interior lots are 20% smaller than what would normally be allowed in the R3 zone. And I guess the logic, the planner's logic, as to the stated logic about the fact that the zoning bylaw didn't envision interior lots not having side yards. For me, that doesn't jive, because surely we knew that townhomes would exist in the R3 zone and they wouldn't have side yards when we passed the zoning bylaw. So we would have set that 300 square meter criteria, understanding that, and then expecting that interior lots would be that size for a good reason, I suspect, because we thought interior lots are constrained as it is, and that they should be larger because people, you tighten up that space, you end up with very small spaces for people to live in. I guess my argument is, I'm just making an argument, I suppose, and certainly not calling into question the planner's logic, but only making an argument of my own, say that I think we did know that, and we set those criteria up intentionally, and I wouldn't have difficulty with it if it was a minor reduction in size, but we're talking going from 300 to 235, and it's 20% smaller. It's a fifth smaller than what we allowed in the zoning bylaw. So what I would like to see, my preference would be, I'm okay with the rezoning to R3, but not with the special provisions. I would rezone it R3 and ask the developer to build a lot that meets the criteria of the R3 zone. I think that's possible, and I think that that's reasonable, and that perhaps these 20% reductions in interior lots are a bit of overreach in that location. So as it is now, I can't support the recommendation, but I would support a recommendation that only rezone to R3. Are there any further questions or comments from members of the committee? Any? So go to the recommendation here. Up to members of the committee. If you have a motion you'd like to make, then you can do that. It's up to members of the committee. Do you have a motion you'd like to make or no? We're awaiting a motion from the Deputy Mayor. Vice Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, I'll second that motion, and I just made a few notes on this application. I support the R311 special. I think it's you've got residential units, 1,022 square feet to 1,270, which is a need for in the community. I've heard from residents in that area feel that 4 units is too tight for that piece of land, that the 20% reduction is too much, and so I share your thoughts. I will be seconding the motion that we, however it's written, I think go back to the developer and talk about 3 units to meet the R311 special requirements of the 300 square meters. So I agree with I agree with the intensification policy. I understand what we're trying to do with a provincial policy statement, but I do believe that lot is meant for 3 units, not 4. So second it. Depending on how it reads.
There is a resolution here. It's been moved and seconded, so I'll read it, though I do have a comment to it. It's been moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by the Vice Deputy Mayor, that Barry's construction application, file number 24218.46, be sent back to the builder to ensure that the interior lots meet the R3 zoning specifications. I would make a comment to the mover and seconder that the appropriate course of action, rather than referring this back to the builder, would be for the committee, or council I should say, to make a decision, and that the decision ought to be to amend the main recommendation to remove the special provisions and to simply rezone the lot, or to recommend that council rezone the lot R3 as opposed to R3 special. Do they need to write that motion, Linda, or could they make that motion? So, does everyone understand what I've said there? That the mover and seconder, with their permission, first off, I'd ask mover and seconder, would you withdraw the recommendation with the resolution? So the resolution as read is withdrawn, and that the motion would be that the recommendation would be amended. So we would I would read it as amended. That it would be amended to rezone the property R3 without the special provisions. I'm going to read the recommendation that way. Anybody can stop me if they're confused. The recommendation that the zoning bylaw amendment Z-42-18.46, provisions described as Block 90, Part Lots 18 to 20, Plan 11, and Part 1, Reference Plan 3R9422, Town of Saugeen Shores, Geographic Town of Port Elgin, be approved as amended, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Vice Deputy Mayor.
I have a question. So if that motion is approved, then obviously it's sent back to developer and requesting that the lot be developed under R3 with no amendments. If it's defeated, what happens if this motion is defeated? The whole thing?
First, we'd have to take. I read that. I apologize. I read that just so you'd be clear what I would be reading. I still need a resolution on the amendment. You guys have made a motion, but it needs to be adopted by council. I just want you to understand what we're putting forward here. So the amendment first that council needs to consider is removing the special provisions from the R3. So you understand that motion. It's been moved by the Deputy Mayor. It's been seconded by the Vice Deputy Mayor. Also, all in favor of the amendment to the recommendation. Opposed? That's carried. So then now I'm going to read the recommendation. That the zoning bylaw. Yes, Councillor Myatt.
Mr. Mayor, would there not have been an opportunity to speak to the amendment before we voted on it?
Question has been carried. If there's any, so that moves us on to the main recommendation then, that the zoning bylaw amendment Z-42-18.46 for the properties described as Block 90, Part Lots 18 to 20, Plan 11, Part 1, Reference Plan 3R9422, Town of Saugeen Shores, Geographic Town of Port Elgin, be approved as amended, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Is there any discussion? Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the removal of the special provision then would take this proposal from 4 units to potentially 3 units. And I in principle, I've gone over this and I've driven by the property a couple of times and had a look at it, and I really had a like for this development because it meets our intensification targets. All too often I find we're calling for intensification, but when it gets before us, we have a hard time accepting it. And this one here, it really, to me, met those targets, and it's providing a home in a price bracket that some people might be able to afford that couldn't otherwise afford it. So when you're going from 4 to 3, there's going to be an incremental increase in the value that the developer has to charge for those homes, and every bracket of price has a potential group of buyers. And I think what we're doing is by doing this, we're excluding a bracket of people who may have taken this as their opportunity to buy their first home. And It's unfortunate that we've done that, and I would have been in support of the special provision. So I will be voting against this.
Thank you for those comments. I would just caution that we have not made any change to what's in terms of what's being proposed. We've only laid out the parameters. That the parameters of the new development shall meet the R3 provisions. So, in theory, the developer could propose anything that met the R3 zone provisions without the special provisions, and also point out that we are indeed intensifying the use of the lot, moving it from an R2 to an R3. So it's, as with everything, maybe a compromise. Anyway, are there any further comments before I call the question? I'll ask all in favor of the recommendation. Opposed? That's carried. All right, thank you for that. Now moves us on then to the next report, which is Tom Schillinglaw, 154 South Rankin Street, and Tessa, I believe, has the report. Tessa.
Thank you. So this one should be pretty quick. Just the presentation up, but so this is the application. This came to committee in December for public meeting, so this is now for recommendation. So just a refresher, this is a property north of the Saugeen River, just off of South Rankin Street and Turner Street. And the zoning bylaw amendment is to allow a temporary use on the property, which will allow these two detached accessory structures, so the shed and the garage, to remain on the property after the house is severed from the rest of the lands. So the owner has proposed to sever approximately 2,500 square meter lot and erect a new dwelling. So the two existing accessory buildings are proposed to be located on the severed lot, and the retained lot would be approximately 940 square meters in area and would contain the existing dwelling. The proposed configuration of the new lot would also result in a reduced rear yard setback for the dwelling, but it's really an effective side yard. The owner intends to begin construction on the new dwelling in early 2019. However, at the time of the proposed severance, the lot would contain two accessory buildings without a principal use. So therefore, the zoning application, I'll just bring up here, proposes to allow a temporary use bylaw, which will allow the two accessory buildings on the property in absence of a principal structure. And also amend the zoning bylaw to provide relief for the rear yard setback, which is technically this one here in this dwelling. So even though the dwelling is oriented towards South Rankin Street, once it's severed, as this is the shorter lot line, it becomes the effective front yard. And so, the effective rear yard is 12 meters, but the effective side yard will be 5 meters, which is less than a rear yard of 7.5 meters, but far greater than the required rear or side yard setback of 1.5 meters. So there were no major issues raised through any of the policies. There was an environmental assessment done to address potential cultural heritage due to the location close to the mouth of the Saugeen River. There was, in terms of the official plan review, there's no issues in terms of the proposed development. It's a residential area proposed to remain residential. The proposed severed lot has actually already been serviced in anticipation of future development on this property during town infrastructure work in 2010. And so there's no issue from an official plan point of view. The zoning bylaw, the subject property is zoned residential first density, and the proposed residential use and accessory buildings are permitted. Both the severed and retained lots meet the majority of the provisions. As I said, the rear yard will have to be addressed for the severed lot. And Section 39 of the Planning Act allows for temporary uses to be permitted on the subject property for a period up to 3 years. In this instance, the proposed temporary use will simply allow the accessory buildings to remain on the lot and the existing dwelling to be severed in order to build a new dwelling on the retained lands. In terms of agency comments, there were included in the previous report to committee, and no issues were raised in regards to the application. We didn't receive any public comments at the public meeting. The agent on the file spoke in favor of the application and stated that the owner is willing to sign an agreement or post securities with the municipality should there be any concern that a new dwelling will not be built on the severed parcel within the 3-year time frame of the temporary use zoning bylaw. But this is outside of the scope of the zoning application. If the town wants to go into some sort of agreement with the owner, they can do that. So we do recommend approval and that the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to the map, page 3, I guess. So you said that because the orientation of the house is facing Rankin Street, but the narrowest lot is on Turner Street. Does that mean the address of the property is going to change?
No, it wouldn't have to. That happens. It's more just from a way to interpret the bylaw. It doesn't change the municipal address.
Okay.
It's just for us for the building department to determine kind of what's the front, what's the rear.
Okay. So the same logic then to the new lot. It looks like the shortest front is once again on Rankin Street.
Yes.
So
yeah, that
will
would
it be a Rankin Street address again as well?
Potentially, yeah. In terms of municipal addresses, that's something that we don't deal with at the county. The town does that, so I'd have to.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the process would be.
And finally, you said that the owner, in fact, I recall when the owner was here, they were quite adamant that they were going to move ahead with a build in the short term, and they were willing to post a bond. And I think you alluded to that at the end there. Is that something that you said it's not required, but it's something that we have the choice to do that with people if they say they're going to do something and not doing it puts them outside of the provisions of the bylaw, that we have the ability to require a bond to be posted?
Yeah, certainly. We've done this before as sort of an inverse to our typical situation where we allow someone to build a second dwelling while they're living in the first. This is where we're allowing them to keep the shed and shop while they're building their houses. Similar principles.
Yeah, all right. That's all.
Questions from members? I don't see any, so I'll read the recommendation. It's been recommended that the zoning bylaw amendment Z5918.48 for the property described as town plot lots 11 and 12 North Rankin, West Division, Town of Saugeen Shores, geographic town of Southampton, be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Are there any questions or comments to the recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. All right. That moves us on then to 6.2.3, that's 263546 Ontario Incorporated, care of Richard Leader, 72 Bruce Road 25, and Tessa again.
Thank you. So this is another application that came for a public meeting back in December and is now coming for a recommendation. So this is for the property on Bruce Road 25. And as mentioned previously, the lands have been severed from the balance of the land, so we're really only focusing on the area with the existing buildings on it. So just to provide some context again, it is currently a residential use, and there is currently school buses being stored on the property in contravention of the zoning bylaw. The land is zoned planned development, which does not allow any new uses to be established on the property, only the continuation of legally existing uses, and those the school bus storage use only started in late summer of 2018, and so well after the zoning bylaw was in place. At the time, the owner was informed by town staff that the school bus storage on the property was not legal, and the establishment of the use was not in compliance with the bylaw, and were required to submit an application for rezoning in order to bring the use into conformity with the bylaw. So that is why we are here today. The lot is serviced with municipal water and septic and takes access off of the County Road, Bruce Road 25. So the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to permit a temporary zoning bylaw on a portion of the subject lands that would permit outdoor storage of buses until July 1st, 2019. So that is the date that we are proposing as the planning department. There's no minimum set in the Planning Act for a temporary use bylaw, only a maximum of 3 years. So there is flexibility with that time frame available to council if they would wish to change that date. So, as mentioned, the use was established on the property in contravention to the bylaw, as it is PD. And the proposed schedule to the bylaw only includes the area here that's been identified on the site plan of outdoor storage area, as where that temporary use would be permitted. The balance of the lands would remain PD. The schedule only includes this kind of grayed out area. In terms of the policies, we went through this at the last meeting. I'll just do a quick refresher. There's no issues from a provincial policy standpoint for this application. In terms of the local official plan, it is designated residential and identified as being a greenfield area. Now, the residential policies does not allow commercial vehicles in residential zones. However, it was the opinion, as noted at the last planning meeting of planning staff, that the lot is agricultural in area for the most part, and the residential nature of the area hasn't yet been established, but will likely be established in time as the town builds out towards Spruce Road 25. So it is expected that will be established, but the use has yet to be established in significant numbers and is unlikely to be developed in the short term. So it was determined that a temporary use bylaw would be appropriate. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the proposed use is being requested on a short-term basis. And so, as I mentioned, the PD zone does not allow for the establishment of any new uses, and the school bus storage use was established on the property after the implementation of the PD zone. A school bus is defined in the zoning bylaw as a vehicle for transporting persons to or from school as defined in the Highway Traffic Act. And the definition of school bus storage is a lot and/or premise for the storage of school buses. And it is not a permitted use in any zone in the bylaw. The site on the buses that where the buses were previously located is zoned Highway Commercial Special, HC 25, and the special provisions in that area allowed for outdoor public storage, defined as the storage of boats, trailers, vehicles, and other similar objects that do not require indoor storage, which may be used by members of the public, subject to certain provisions. And we felt that this does not fully capture the same use as school bus storage, which are not typically used by members of the public, but it is a comparable use. The zoning bylaw includes the term transport terminal in the definition of service establishment, but only for the purposes of stating that service establishments do not include a transport terminal. And a truck terminal is permitted in the AC2 zone, but is not defined in the bylaw. And so just for comparison, the Municipality of Kincardine zoning bylaw includes the same definition of school bus storage as found in the Saugeen Shores bylaw. And in their municipality, school bus storage has been permitted through special provisions in the agricultural, commercial, industrial zone and is permitted as of right in the rural, commercial, industrial zone. So in this case, for the temporary use, special provisions have been included in order to allow basically the white buses on the property. They're not white buses are not school buses under the Highway Traffic Act. School buses are yellow buses, and so any other buses used to transport employees, anything like that, aren't considered school buses under the Highway Traffic Act. So they don't meet the definition in the bylaw. So we have included special provisions that would allow those white buses to also be stored there as they currently are, but council could choose to change that if they wanted to. And we are recommending the temporary use bylaw only be approved until July 1st in order, and then the use would revert to being non-conforming at that time. And as I mentioned, only the lands identified as temporary outdoor storage area will have been included in the schedule for the proposed bylaw. The balance of the lands will remain PD, and at the recommendation of the Town of Saugeen Shores staff, a provision has also been included so that the subject lands would be subject to site plan control. So the agency comments are the same that were included in the previous report, so I won't go through all of them, but town staff did seek to have the lands come under site plan control in order to address some issues, including lighting on the property, which can be appropriately addressed through that mechanism. As I'm sure the committee is aware, a number of public comments were received in regards to this application, both in writing, which have been included in the report, and also orally at the last public meeting. I'm just going to address a few of the comments that were made that are related to planning and land use that I have the kind of capacity to address. And so one was the definition of school bus storage, and that this definition did not adequately define what was happening on the site. So I kind of worked through my logic, and I believe that it's generally understood that school buses have a particular use of transporting students to and from school during school days. As such, the majority of time outside of those school route hours, they are not in use and are required to be parked or stored somewhere. And in my opinion, there's not a significant difference in the idea of parking versus storage when we're thinking of school buses. It should be noted that this use is markedly different from the use of transportation depot, which is also defined in the bylaw, but includes picking up and discharging passengers, ticket sales, restaurants, luggage and parcel shipping, and office uses. However, if council is not of the opinion that school bus storage adequately explains the use of this site, they could provide a different definition, should they choose. In terms of traffic, this was a major issue that was raised by a member of the public. So I would just note that Bruce Road 25 is identified as an arterial road in the town of Saugeen Shores official plan. Arterial roads are intended to provide for high passenger and commercial vehicle traffic and are the main traffic routes intended for large volumes of long and medium range traffic moving to destinations within or through the town. It is the same road class as Highway 21, so we should expect the same volume of traffic on those two roads. So the official plan has identified Bruce Road 25 as an appropriate use for the type of traffic created by school bus uses. So the fact that it's increased is not necessarily an issue per the official plan policies. I'd also note that the southern side of Bruce Road 25 has been identified as an active transportation route. And there were concerns raised in terms of pedestrian and cyclist safety. And so the OP identifies these areas really for future investment and for the maintenance of existing infrastructure. The policies of the OP require that consideration be given to the development of active transportation routes such as bike lanes and on-road trails when road improvements are undertaken. The policies also aim to ensure sidewalks are provided on both sides of arterial roads wherever feasible. These policies are in place to reduce conflict between vehicular traffic and vulnerable road users. And I think that it's really to reduce that, not necessarily through reducing volume on arterial roads, but through by identifying areas for investment in infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists. So it is an arterial road. It's expected to have high levels of traffic, but it's also an area that's been identified where there should be investment in public infrastructure for other road users as well. So I really think that's the kind of policy, how the policies of the OP have been laid out. A number of issues were raised in terms of property standards. So the town of Saugeen Shores has adopted a property standards bylaw, which allows it to enforce rules in relation to the lighting on the property and any other issues in terms of property standards that may arise. The proposed bylaw, however, also includes provisions to subject the property to site plan control, which is an additional mechanism that the town can use to address some of these issues. There are also comments raised about the process for this application, and that it should have gone, the public should have been involved at the very early stages as soon as this was identified as an issue. And I'll just note that we at the position are not at the county are not in a position to bring an application before the public before it has been received, deemed complete, and made part of the public record. So we're not able to engage the public in a participatory process before that. It's confidential for the sake of all developers until it's deemed complete, and we wouldn't be bringing it to the public. That would be on each owner. Each landowner's own onus to do that if they wanted to do that preemptively for a lot, but we can't do that at the county. So the process has been followed as it's laid out in the Planning Act. So with that, that's kind of the issues there. I do recommend approval, but just as a temporary use, and I've put the date till July 1st, and subject to any changes to the bylaw that council would like to see.
Thank you very much. So questions from members of council. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Tessa, in the report in a couple of places, although you recommend July 1st as the deadline for the temporary use zoning bylaw amendment, it says 1 year in two other places. So is that just a general statement, or on page 5 and page 8? I just wanted to make sure that it's consistent.
Page 8 would be the comments from the town of Saugeen Shores, which I don't edit.
Okay.
So that would have been their comments.
And page 5 is the same thing then?
Might be looking at a different place than you, because on page 5. I
think it was identical wording in both places. Okay, so we take your recommendation. Right, okay. I have a couple more questions. And I guess these questions would probably go to Jay. In Mr. Mann's deputation to us, he suggested several alternative storage locations, such as the high school or the Plex. And would you comment on the feasibility of those possible sites, please?
I won't comment on behalf of the school board for their site, but for the Plex site, internally, we staff believe that we might be able to accommodate bus storage, but for like hyper temporary time periods, like days at most, because of the intensive nature of the Plex at periodic times throughout any given week, even throughout the day and evening. So we couldn't accommodate bus storage when they're actually stored over the evenings. So I would not recommend that as an alternative location.
Thank you. I do have one more question for Jay. If the committee does support the recommended extension of the temporary bylaw amendment to July 1st, what then can be practically done by the town to ensure that the applicants comply with that?
So there's two things. One is that it provides some surety to the client, or to the client, I should say to the applicant, because it gives them an opportunity to find an alternative permanent location and go through the appropriate process, because we acknowledge there are not many locations in town. But secondarily, it allows us to work with the landowner and applicant to, and I think it's the most important part, is that we can actually acquire securities to ensure completion. So make it sufficient enough through the site plan process that they actually comply, and there'd be an economic disincentive for them to continue non-compliance, rather than the court system and be on our terms.
Further comments from members? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I have a few comments. I have a question of Jay. Jay, the applicant, I think I read in the report somewhere, was there communication with the applicant within the past year where a rezoning application was discussed? And if so, when was that? When did that take place? And what was the reasoning for not making application for a rezoning application?
So I can't answer the second part because I'm not the applicant, and I don't know why no application was made until after the activity started. But approximately a year and a half ago, given the time, my recollection, and I don't have those notes from that time period in front of me, it was about a year and a half ago we met, the county and the town met with the landowner to advise about what needed to be done to get a bus parking or bus storage at that location. And they were advised they needed to amend the zoning bylaw if they wanted to do that.
Okay, well, here's the thing. My view anyways, I mean, the bus lot was established on the property in contravention of the town zoning bylaw. it's an illegal use. I've spoken to residents along that road, left lots of emails. One resident in particular at 6:30 in the morning knows that 20 buses are going to be starting up, puts the earplugs in, tries to back sleep with the noise of those engines starting up. So I drove by tonight and there's two big bright spotlights shining. There's supposed to be 3 dimmer lights, but those 2 bright spotlights were shining very brightly tonight and do on a regular basis. This happens too much, and I guess that's why we have a planning committee, and where we look at these applications and say yay or nay. I'll be supporting the recommendation to July 1st. I'm not quite as harsh as some of the comments made about removing immediately, although this is an illegal application. I just think that that County Route 25 is a road, Mr. Mayor, within the next year or two is going to see bike lanes on the north side of the road. It's and I can't see buses crossing that brand new bike lane 4 times a day, out back. It's a busy road with power traffic. There's probably housing right in beside that bus parking lot in there in the next 3, 4, 5 years, I would dare say. It's just it's the right business, but in the wrong place. We need a bus parking lot in this community, and I would say to the applicant that I know staff and council do all they can to address a rezoning application when brought forth, and there's got to be another location somewhere. So I'll be supporting the. I think the planner's got it right. I know there's call to get shut it down immediately, but these kids have got to get to school, and I can't see shutting down an application today. That's for sure. But I do support July 1st, and surely we can work with staff in the county, and if it's a rezoning application, let's let's find an alternate site and move this forward as quickly as we can for another location.
Councilor Schreier.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the Vice Deputy on that. I guess I look at it as there being 2 issues. One tonight that's before us is the situation that we're in, and I think we're in an unfortunate situation that we were put in. And so I think that we look at that and we deal with it. We deal with, and maybe this is a question for Jay, is what are the consequences when a bylaw is not adhered to? If Jay can answer that, I'm not sure if he can right now or not. But then I guess the second part of that is when we separate these 2 issues, the situation that we're in now, but then also do we expect that there will be a formal application to rezone this, that this might actually extend to 3 years?
So that's a lot there. Maybe I can't answer the second part because of the I haven't been consulting with the landowner. Maybe Tessa has. And in general terms, I'll speak to sort of how we want to ensure that when these the scenarios arise where there's non-compliances, it's important that we treat all situations the same. So when we can build a good defense with, if we need to go through the court system to require enforcement, we can point and say we've treated them through a very standard, methodical process to ensure that defense is, that's, I'm not the lawyer, but that's sort of my understanding, and I respect that understanding so that we have the best case for enforcement. I think it was said at the last meeting, it's unfortunate that's what the process is.
I guess my question, and I don't think that you can answer that, though, is that will there actually be a formal application to amend the zoning for up to 3 years? That could happen.
It's possible to happen. Certainly anyone can apply at any time under the Act for their day in front of council, but I don't know if that's the applicant's intention.
Further questions from members? Councillor Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I agree with everything that's been said so far, in particular the comments from Councillor Schreider, that we're being put in a difficult situation here in that we have to get the children to school. The buses are there. It would appear, and I don't know if anybody, that'll be my first question then, has anybody spoken to First Student and find out if they have a contingency plan in place other than put them in our parking lot out here?
Certainly, I've not been successful in speaking to First Student. I've made attempts, but not as a formal way to address how they might respond to the result of tonight's application.
So herein, we find ourselves going on a bit of a wing and a prayer here. We have the bus company hasn't spoken to us. The applicant who's in the room here hasn't spoken to us to tell us what their intentions are. We're putting in proposed, if we go ahead with the proposed extension until July the 1st, we're putting a rule out there that may or may not be complied with. I would strongly recommend that there be some sort of a monetary bond or a penalty put in place, somewhat equal to the rent that's being collected on the property. But for me and once again it also goes against my inclinations, because I think that as a property owner, you should have the maximum flexibility to do on your property. That's one of my guiding principles. You should have the flexibility to do on your property what is allowed, and if it's not allowed, you should go through the processes to get that allowed, and to circumvent then is to not hold this council in regards to their duties. And so I tend to think that we should allow this activity to take place, but on the other hand, I feel like we've been treated second-handed, and I have not heard, and I would like to hear from the applicant to say, we will comply with what is being proposed here, or we have no intention to comply, or we will be extending another application. If I was to hear that from the applicants, then I might feel a little better about entering into an agreement. But having not heard from the applicant or the bus company or anybody other than our own planners, it really leaves me in a difficult situation, and I find it very difficult to support this application.
I think the thing we have to remember at this point is that our role is to consider the use of the land and the bylaws that govern that use. All of those things are before us and available to us. And so we have a recommendation from the planner to make those interpretations for us, and a path forward from the planner, who has been in consultation with the applicant. So I think that I think we do have the details we require at this stage to make a decision with regard to our responsibility, which is making sure the land is used in an appropriate way. I would say too that, and just for public consumption, that we're very keen to have a successful bus company, school bus company, operate in the town of Saugeen Shores. It's a necessary business. Our students need to get to school. Many Bruce Power employees need to get to work. And we want to see that business succeed. And we want it here. We've discovered through this process that we don't have a lot of land zoned in the municipality to accommodate that use, which was interesting to discover. So we need to get there. We need land that's zoned appropriately for it. But it needs to happen in the right way, in accordance with the bylaws that are in place and in accordance with the law. And the planner's given us a path forward to achieve that. So I think that I support the recommendation, and I hope working together, perhaps with the assistance of economic development staff inside the town of Saugeen Shores, along with Jay's capable assistance, we can sort this out in the coming months, and I'm very confident we're going to continue to have a successful bus company operating in Saugeen Shores. I would just ask one question to conclude my own comments. With regard to the site plan control provision of this, it's temporary use. I mean, it ends on the 1st of July. How do you exercise site plan control in less than 6 months? Do you have an idea practically how that will play out?
No, I don't. But I'm willing to work with the landowner on a expedited process with council support to ensure that it's brought forward in a timely way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
The only last comment I had was, how do we get those two bright spotlights turned off? It's a concern of the residents. There are 3 other smaller lights that have been put in for security lights. Why are the 2 lights, the bright spotlights, still operating? And I would like to make that a formal request to have those bright spotlights disconnected.
I think we've heard that, and certainly be a matter for site plan control. We're going to approve some site plan control here, and that'll be part of that discussion. Further, anything else that I see? Yeah, Councillor Schreier.
Sorry, through you. And I believe that Councillor Mayette had asked this as well, but I guess I come from, and I'm a believer in policies and bylaws and that, and I think that that's our job. We create them, and then we do our best. I think we can be fair and reasonable, and that's why there's the amendment process. I guess a question that I have, though, is that if this recommendations goes forward tonight and July 1st comes, and after July 1st, then it would be noted that they would not be in compliance anymore. What assurances do we have at this table that that business will not operate past that deadline? Because I'm not confident with an answer right now at this point. Thank you.
I think it's important to remember there are enforcement provisions in the zoning bylaw. This process, the ideal outcome always is to work with a property owner, even when they're in contravention, to come to a solution through the zoning bylaw to bring them into compliance. That's what we're trying to work on here. But there are backstops in the zoning bylaw, enforcement measures that the municipality can take, not only in the zoning bylaw, but in the proper standards bylaw, et cetera, et cetera. And as you go through that process, if compliance doesn't occur, then enforcement can be stepped up. So I think, we have options. There's never going to be, there's no way to guarantee a perfect outcome. Lots of things can happen, but we do have options to enforce the bylaw, and I know that our administration, in cooperation with the county, will do that. So I'm going to read the recommendation. The recommendation is that the zoning bylaw amendment Z6218.44 for the property described as Saugeen Lake Range, lots 31 and 32, reference plan 3R-4086, part 7, town of Saugeen Shores, geographic Saugeen Township, be approved as a temporary use and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. If there's nothing further, I'll ask all in favor. Opposed? That's carried. Okay, so that moves us then on, finally, to report 6.2.4, the official plan amendment for the town of Saugeen Shores, and I think Daniel has that report. Daniel.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. So this is an application on behalf of the town in order to bring the town's official plan and zoning policies into conformity with the Saugeen Grey Sauble Northern Bruce Peninsula Source Protection Plan, as required by the Ontario Clean Water Act. So, according to the Source Protection Plan, the OP should identify vulnerable areas and apply the appropriate significant threat policies where required in conformity with the Source Protection Plan. So these mapping schedules identify the vulnerable areas, intake protection zone, events-based areas, significant groundwater recharge areas, and highly vulnerable aquifers. And so back up there. So those are the vulnerable areas. And the significant threat policies that I alluded to exist primarily with the events-based areas. And that's centered on the town's intake pipe into Lake Huron, which is just off Peel Street in Southampton. So in this regard, policies exist in the Source Protection Plan for fuel storage tanks greater than 13,000 liters, as well as 25,000 liters in a different area. And policies center on those, on that use, storage tanks greater than those uses. So that's what this OPA and zoning bylaw amendment is focused on. And we covered this in December, so I'm not going to go in great detail here, but we did get some comments from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks as well as the Source Protection Office. We incorporated those comments into the proposed amendments. There were some questions last time on the province's comments, specifically their encouragement to use or to consider creating policies for transport pathways in the events-based areas, and transport pathways would include such things as sewers and ditches. At this point, there's no statutory requirement to include these policies, and moreover, I couldn't find much in the way of guidance material from the province for policies on transport pathways. So it's my recommendation at this point we leave policies on transport pathways out of the proposed OPA and ZBA until there's more guidance from the province. And also note, in the absence of these policies, the town is still employing current best practices related to sewer and stormwater management through the engineering function. There was also a recommendation that the proposed OPA, ZBA be deferred and incorporated into the next comprehensive review of the OPA. This suggestion was discussed with town staff, and it was noted that there's annual reports to the Source Protection Office and funding attached with those annual reports. So they were in favor of bringing this forward prior to the comprehensive review. Well, it can be delayed until a comprehensive review. It would be my recommendation that the OPA be adopted and the ZBA be approved to bring the OPA into conformity with the Source Protection Plan. And that's because regardless of the approval of these policies, any Planning Act application that would trigger a review under the Source Protection Plan is still subject to the Source Protection Plan policies. So what we're doing here is taking the pertinent policies out of the Source Protection Plan, putting them into a central document for access to prospective applicants. So I think it's a little easier on that end of the spectrum for applicants to deal with one document. Having looked at the Source Protection Plan, it is rather confusing even to myself to navigate. So I could imagine the pain of a prospective applicant trying to navigate that, looking for the appropriate policies. There was no public comments received and no other issues raised by any other agencies who were circulated. So just to recap, this proposed amendment would bring the OP into conformity with the Source Protection Plan and be associated with the appropriate zoning bylaw provisions. So my recommendation would be approval, the adoption of the OPA, and the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Questions or comments from members of council? No. All right, will read the recommendation. It's recommended that the local official plan amendment SSOPA 31-18.46 affecting all lands within the town of Saugeen Shores be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for consideration of adoption and the county of Bruce for approval, and that zoning bylaw amendment Z 37-18.46 affecting all lands within the town of Saugeen Shores be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. If there's no further questions or comments, I'll ask all in favor. Carried. All right, and that takes us on to item 6.2.5, the staff report on increasing the housing supply in Ontario. Jay.
So I won't read the 5 pages. I want to just a few brief comments, sort of on the thematic strains that you can see in the report. I hope, but just want to. It's no surprise to you that there's a housing supply and affordability problem or issue in Saugeen Shores. This is common throughout Ontario, particularly in the GTA. So it's not serendipity that the province is asking and consulting on this issue. What can we do, or what can the province do to increase housing supply? But if I can just wax philosophical for a moment, it's I think it's an existential problem, one that doesn't have a traditional solution. In other words, if you try to have a single solution, you could do great damage. You can cause other things to happen. There's a lot of interconnectedness and interrelatedness among many issues for housing, as it is with many issues in municipal government. But so the two themes that sort of flowing from that philosophy are that the recommendations are to allow municipalities to maintain or increase flexibility to respond to the housing issues in a manner that they see best fit. So I think you'll see that in the recommendations, but also to make sure the municipalities are given the appropriate powers and responsibility to address the issues in the local context, because I think, we are in a better position than regional or provincial authorities to understand the housing needs in any community. So with that in mind, I sort of leave the recommendations for your discussion if you want, but the final thought is we have a deadline of Friday, so acknowledging that there isn't a formal council adoption of this following the meeting, I would forward this report sort of on the basis in good faith that it'll follow through with a resolution at some point.
Okay, well, there is a recommendation. I'll read the recommendation in this case, and we can take any comments to it. The recommendation is that Council endorses the comments outlined herein with regard to the province's request for comments on increasing housing supply in Ontario, and that the comments be forwarded to Huron-Bruce MPP, Lisa Thompson, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs prior to the conclusion of their consultation process. Questions or comments from members of Council? Councillor Grace.
Mr. Mayor, and through you. First of all, I guess I would say that I like the inclusion of your recommendation to re-examine the development charges for school boards. I think that's something that should be examined with the growth, and certainly I think if your intention would be to specifically set aside development charges to support building a new school. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. I think that's totally something that's appropriate for us. Something that I did send to you today, and I know you responded, but I wondered if you could clarify for me. Your suggestion several times of prohibiting appeals for housing projects which meet pre-approved local policy aimed at meeting provincial and local housing targets. So I think I understand what you're driving at there, but I guess I'm uncomfortable with a suggestion of prohibiting appeals point blank. I wonder if you could elaborate on your reply.
Going back to sort of the themes of the commenting is that I think municipalities are in a better position to understand how to respond to a particular issue, in this case a housing issue. So if we can develop on our own terms policy that we're satisfied with when developments come, or if they're not developments of a public authority, if they're a private partnership or a private development, they should have the surety that a development can proceed and that meets those local policies. So I would recommend in the implementation that we be as specific as we can, so we all understand what is required to receive municipal authority or approval, so that time, money, and other resources aren't spent fighting at the LPAT to determine whether, is this consistent? You can imagine how that sort of process can go, and even with the changes under the Bill 139 you identified in your email, I don't see any improvement in that regard. Certainly they're faster, but there are still those arguments as to whether something is consistent or something conforms with policy. So if we can prohibit an appeal, it just means that you're the authority, this council's the authority, and the project can proceed.
Further comments? Councillor Grace. Yeah.
If I could follow up, how frequently does that occur? I just don't want to be saying that our reason for giving up a right to appeal is based on expediency.
I don't know how often it might come up, though you've certainly in the last few years you've had opportunity to see how comments arise on particular developments in town, and the cost or the time needed to address those objections or concerns might not be amenable to ensuring housing supply is increased or made it continue to be affordable. I don't want to draw, top of my head, I can't think of the particular examples, though even tonight we had comments about, whether that, if that was an appealed matter, either by the developer or by the one of the neighbors, that could add time and therefore delay in trying to get a particular housing need in the community.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mine's really just to compliment Jay. It's a well-written report, and it obviously put a considerable amount of time into it. And the fact that we're invited to make comments is a good thing. And let's see how many of these recommendations or comments are listened to. But I just want to commend you on a job well done in this report. Thank you.
Other comments? I was going to say, Jay, I particularly like the inclusion of the cash in lieu of inclusionary zoning. I think that's a really interesting concept because in many of these developments, it may not be exactly pertinent to a particular development to include accessibility or affordability for whatever reason, and it could be very legitimate reasons. But in those cases, it would, I think, be entirely appropriate to ask developers to contribute something overall to affordable housing across the community, so that we could give that money, or we could move that money perhaps to our own efforts or to county efforts to build affordable housing in the community. I think that's a really smart concept. And the other comment I was going to make, that one comment in here that we seek ways to streamline infrastructure approvals, I think is really right on. But I think you could go even further and say that we should look at the mandates of the approval agencies, whether it be this authority, whether it be the County of Bruce, whether it be conservation authorities, whether it be the ministry itself, and seek to streamline those so that decision making on single applications aren't made at multiple levels. Attempt to bring decision making into as few hands as possible on individual applications. We have applications here, one tonight, frankly, where we approved a zoning bylaw, and severance approvals, consents will be made at in another agency on the same application. Multiple public meetings, multiple needs, we need two committees at two different. I wouldn't say it's redundant, because both of those processes are necessary, but it's overly complicated for applicants and takes time. And so if we could streamline those processes, and then, and heaven help them, had they been close to the controlled area of the Conservation Authority or anything else, it would be another agency with another board and another set of approvals. So, I think you could be even explicit in here to say, seek ways to limit the number of agencies that are required to review single applications. The terminology has been the one window approach, but we have never gotten anywhere near it. And we should try harder. I think we could do that. And by doing so, speed those processes up and make it easier to do any kind of development, including affordable housing. So that was just one thought I had. But anyway, it was by and large a really good report, and appreciate it very much. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would request if I could, somehow it could be shown in the minutes. I still have a concern about using the word prohibiting appeals. So just so it's on the record that at least one member of council has a concern about that. Thanks.
I'm sure we'll be included, and perhaps, and this is really just us endorsing overall comments, perhaps it's possible for the supervisor to soften his language a bit on that, or tweak it a little bit to soften that. I think we can get across that concept that we would like to limit appeals or minimize the opportunity for appeals on these processes. I think that would get across the intent without being quite so perhaps strict. I think you're right, on the right track, Councillor Grace, in terms of not asking the province to prohibit anything really, to try to make it easier without being draconian with the process. So I think, I don't know, would you have any comment on that, Jay?
Only the comment to say, I think, maybe it sounds too defensive, but that I think it's important to be clear that that is a tangible, costly hurdle to housing development, and that if I used, off the top of my head, limit, it may not get the point strongly enough. But if someone else has another suggestion, I'm happy to.
I don't think we need to debate it. I think, the councillor's objection is noted, and I think we can leave it in your hands to put it forward in the best way for in the municipality's best interests. Are there any other comments before we call the question on the recommendation? All in favor then? That's carried. All right. So that takes us then on to adjournment, I think. Yes, so we'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Schreider. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.